Hello, this is a presentation titled Chipageddon, the causes and impacts of the IT component supply chain crisis and the prospects for the remainder of 2021. My name is Mike Kilner, Senior Category Manager at LEPC, where I joined in 2001. I'm presently the Contract Manager for the National Desktop and Notebook Agreement, and I've also sat on as the member of the Board of Trustees of Electronics Watch since its foundation in 2016. The idea of this presentation arose from discussions as contract lead for the NDNA. This is confirmed following received feedback to the delegate requests sent out in early April, which asked for the IT procurement related concerns, issues or interest presently keeping you awake at night. IT supply chain shortages and rising costs appeared as a common thread in several responses. Along with ongoing desk-based research, this presentation has been put together with the help of several high-level personnel within the IT supply chain who I'd like to thank for their time and contribution, including members from Lenovo, HP, Acer, Dynabook, and AMD. The presentation, which should take around 15 minutes, is broken down into 9 bite-sized, easy-to-digest sections. Chips with everything and panels, car trouble, natural events, when two tribes, which looks at the present geopolitics at work between the US and China, home comforts, more chips please, transport and logistics, cost impacts, and what we can do. Unfortunately, for those expecting the triple-cooked sliced potato variety, this concerns the humble microchip or integrated circuit. The world has largely taken for granted the continuous and uninterrupted cycle of production and consumption of these ICs for decades now. Most PC-savvy people will know at least common ICs, the memory module and the processor, for example. However, they're increasingly found everywhere in modern life. Even a household LED light bulb includes startlingly sophisticated microelectronics with a circuit board and multiple mounted LEDs. There usually include at least 2 ICs which provide temperature compensation, dimming, power conversion, and sometimes other functions. Specialist storage ICs and NAND flash controllers are key subcomponents found in our notebook solid-state drives and the eMMC storage found in Chromebook PCs. They also likewise, however, used throughout in 5G infrastructure, Internet of Things devices, crypto mining, and cloud infrastructure. LCD panel driver ICs are found in everything from your smartphones to large monitors and TVs. Drill down the IC and you have the ABF substrate, which is formed from multiple layers of microcircuits and supplied to semiconductor foundries such as TSMC and UMC in Taiwan. More about both of those later. There are sourcing difficulties with MLCCs, multi-layer ceramic capacitors, which in itself is an $8.8 billion global market and used in every modern electronics device. A capacitor is an electrical component that stores potential energy. An iPhone will have 1,000, a Tesla 5 car has around 10,000. The increase in demand for MLCCs and smartphones, portable computing, and the automotive industry has been considerably higher than manufacturers had previously anticipated. Inevitably, the shortages have also been exacerbated by companies over-ordering components to build up inventory, afraid of being caught short again. Panel demand has been hugely accelerated by the pandemic and years ahead of previous long-term forecasts. The demand bubble is not expected to burst, or predicted forecast it says it will continue. Pre-pandemic, the intersection of stagnating demand for LCD panels and low-cost Chinese competitors ramping up production had led to LCD panel prices declining worldwide, and both LG and Samsung Display closing some or all of their mainstream LCD panel fabs. They moved out of these less profitable areas into emerging technologies such as quantum dot OLED and micro LED. What we've seen is smaller 11-inch and either larger and or high spec panels such as those in workstation notebooks, retaining better availability, while 14 and 15-inch have become very, very tight in the supply market, particularly on touch. For monitors, there's little or no spare capacity in the mainstream 21.5 and 23.8-inch sizes. Supply could worsen further, with Corning and AU Optronics reportedly planning to undertake annual maintenance for their fabs shortly. I hope some people have already spotted the 2 early 80s music references, certainly the over 50s in the audience. We've looked at ICs and panels, and one of the fastest growing sectors for both technologies is the automotive industry. Everything from driver assistance functions to dashboards to fully autonomous systems is seeing IC and MLCC demand spiral upwards within the sector. The increasing global share of fully or hybrid electric vehicles has accelerated the auto sector's share of available componentry away from elsewhere, including, as they do, sophisticated onboard management. Even though the majority of the 3,000 to 5,000 ICs often cost just a few dollars, there is no means to manufacture that £80,000 car without them. Surprisingly strong and growing consumer demand occurred towards the back end of 2020. The lack of MLCCs and automotive chips led automakers like Ford to announce that the shortage will likely reduce productivity by 1.1 million vehicles this year alone. Volkswagen, Toyota, Honda, Fiat Chrysler, Nissan, Jaguar Land Rover, Volvo, Mitsubishi are amongst the many impacted and periodically idling plants. Pressure on the entire component supply chain to prioritize the automotive sector above others is having an inevitable impact on availability and costs. Pricing for automotive ICs have risen by around 30%, while current lead times are anywhere between 28 and 40 weeks. This again draws away available fabrication or fab capacity from components needed for PCs, servers, and so on. The Nitobo and Renesas factory fires in Japan and this February's freak storm across Texas have contributed to sending memory module pricing upwards. The power shortages and blackouts in the wake of the latter impacted several major chip manufacturers, including Samsung, NXP, and Infineon. Mitsubishi Motors had to cut output by 16,000 units, or 14% of worldwide, in May due to the Renesas fire, and there are similar cuts at Suzuki, Nissan, and Subaru. Continued drought in Taiwan, which produces 53% of global semiconductors, is a concern for the foundries because water is key in processing silicon and chip production. The island has had its driest 12 months in over 50 years, and for example, its third largest reservoir at Sengwen is now just 15% of normal volume. Each wafer requires 8,000 to 12,000 liters of water to produce it, with an average fab consuming around 13.5 million liters per day. TSMC alone used 58 million tons of water last year, with just over 3 million that saved through conservation and recycling efforts. The continued US-China trade disputes and accompanying sanctions impacts on the supply chain and costs. China's attempts to develop its own advanced chip industry have largely failed, and it's been forced to import chips in numbers well above those forecasted. Last year, Washington imposed restrictions on chip makers from exporting certain semiconductors to China. The escalating trade war and export controls in China appears to be a no-win situation predicted to hurt non-Chinese economies and jobs. Eventually, non-Chinese companies will be shut out of one of the largest chip markets. Dutch company ASML, for example, has a de facto monopoly on advanced extreme ultraviolet lithography equipment needed to make cutting-edge chips, and is a crucial supplier to Samsung Electronics and TSMC. It has plans to drive deeper into China, and Beijing wants to build a world-class homegrown chip industry to wean itself off foreign imports, an effort that would need ASML's one-of-a-kind machines. The company, however, faces extreme difficulty in receiving a license to export the systems to China amid the ongoing trade tensions. All three segments, business, education, and consumer, experienced an unprecedented surge in global demand back in March 2020 that nobody could have possibly predicted at the start of that year, and one that continues to show little sign of abating. The surge to move to an online world, being the new normal, completely flipped the demand and supply balance, and certainly in the early months, notebooks, for example, were every bit as short as the toilet paper shelves in supermarkets. It appears that component shortages will be a topic of conversation within IT for the majority of 2021, possibly well beyond that. This recently published global shipment table from IDC noted traditional PCs, that's including desktops, notebooks, and workstations, grew 55.2% year on year during the first quarter of 2021. The figures could have been higher. Notebook makers have seen shipments fall short of orders by some margin. In the EMEA, or Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, nearly 24.1 million devices were shipped, up 44.1 year on year, of which 12.6 million were portable, up 74.2%. Over 400 million usable devices are beyond 4 years old, which will mean the natural refresh cycle alone will keep demand strong. Chromebook shipments are expected to reach over 40 million units in 2021, up from 30 million shipped a year earlier. The release of 5G has released pent-up mobile phone demand, further removing component availability from the supply chain. And the negative impact on the production lines of both Samsung and Apple have been announced by their respective CEOs. Wi-Fi modules are also getting tight, and general networking from home routers to enterprise equipment fall into the same category. Nintendo's Switch games console is in its 5th year, and yet production has ramped up to about 30 million units in its last fiscal year, an all-time high on the back of continuing stay-at-home demand driven by further social gaming titles and an online paid subscription service that allows people to pair with one another and game. They reportedly have an adequate supply of components for the time being, but did not rule out future problems in a recent briefing. Sony's PlayStation 5 was released in November last year, and as you might expect, is loaded with high-performance chips. According to Gartner, worldwide semiconductor revenue totaled $466.2 billion in 2020, an increase of 10.4% from 2019. The finished processor supply situation is not getting any better, not getting any worse either. Graphics specialist NVIDIA saw 45.2% growth in 2020, primarily driven by its gaming-related and data center businesses, including crypto mining. You unfortunately can't just make more, not in significant volumes at least. Adding new production tools to an existing chip plant takes at least a year, and building a new one takes at least 3. A lean and mean industry is seeing waste, overcapacity, and unprofitable lines of business stripped back over successive years. Intel have announced a $20 billion plan to significantly expand production, including 2 new plants in Arizona. It may take until 2024 for these plants to ease the situation. TSMC is spending $100 billion to expand capacity over the next 3 years, including a fab in Phoenix, Arizona, Intel's backyard, where the Taiwanese company will produce the chips Apple, for example, need, but the Americans can't make. Transport and logistics costs are an important element of final pricing, and every manufacturer and importer is having to diversify their options. For Europe, most desktops and servers are assembled in the region with a significant number of parts transported from both China and neighboring countries. For notebooks, finished units are typically assembled in the Far East and flown from there with supporting sea and rail shipments. For this market, not every flight from Asia will go straight into the UK. Many go to a European hub like Amsterdam and then trucked across. The latter route adds an extra 3 to 4 days to the journey time, although this is stretched to 2 weeks when the Brexit changes came in at the turn of the year. As we know, last year's unfortunate events have dramatically reduced global air travel. The pandemic immediately cut global flights by over 50%, and it's taken considerable time for standard and charter freight flights to start to recover, all at greater expense without the passenger flight market to provide capacity. The sea freight sector was already struggling with demand before the recent sewage blockage. It's all added to the problem of both ships and containers being in the wrong place, plus massive congestion at the busier worldwide ports. Logistics teams are having to deal with a large fall in the number of available containers in the Far East to refill, and have seen costs up to 4 times the level prior to the pandemic, which is not expected to change anytime soon. The forecast for the next 6-7 months will be very demand dependent. Capacity had been driven out by oversupply and low prices prior to the pandemic. Therefore, the supply situation may only see minor gradual improvements. Although more expensive per ton, the so-called New Silk Road rail transport link from the Pacific seaports to Europe is increasingly being used. For example, the Chongqing to Duisburg in the Ruhr, Germany service carries 50 40-foot containers. By May 2020, approximately 50 trains a week were coming into Europe to meet increased demand. These enter at the Belarus and Poland border. A normal transit time is around 13 to 16 days, or up to 3 weeks in congested periods. A container ship might usually take around about 36 days from the Far East to Europe. OEMs are taking more control of the supply chain than ever before, working through the tiers, because if no use of one key component supplier says no problem, when you know its suppliers are facing constraint situations. In panels, LCD driver ICs have increased around $4 to $6, and glass substrates by a similar level. Some panels manufacturers are anecdotally forecasted to have increased 10 to 20% in their pricing for the second quarter, and AU Optronics and Innolux are expected to report significant earnings growth on the back of that. DRAM, there were 5 to 10% increases last year, and the trend continues upwards. PC and server DRAM contract prices are expected to rise between 18 and 23% this quarter on the back of bullish demand. Storage ICs, SSD increases could go higher, fueled by NAND flash demand outpacing supply this year, anywhere between 5 and 15%, depending on the line. Reports that China-based crypto mining hardware makers are panic buying all the available large capacity SSDs from the spot market, driven by storage-intensive Bitcoin rival Chia, which will affect both on-premise and storage-as-a-service enterprise solutions. ABF substrates and fabs all have had to increase quotes on the back of tight ABF supply and rising costs, and can do so on the back of capacity shortages and rising demand. Availability at standard 6 and 8-inch fabs will not improve until 2023 at the earliest. Also seeing pressure applied by the likes of UMC on major clients to enter into a 3-year supply agreement. Labour shortage, we mentioned, there's a growing labour shortage across China's manufacturing industry, with the growing appeal of working in e-commerce, online food ordering, ride-hailing, and similar gig economy areas to the younger generation. The pandemic also motivated provinces to improve and create local job opportunities to prevent workers from having to seek jobs in the traditional coastal regions. Hiring costs are therefore increasing and being passed on down the supply chain. So down to my final slide. So forward planning is essential. Ascertain requirements across your estate and pull together what your volumes will look like going forward. Pre-competition engagement with the market will help in the specification decision-making process if vendors are allowed to impart their market knowledge from both a cost and availability perspective. The NDNA has a price support mechanism in place with Intel and a route into AMD, in addition to the support provided by the contracted manufacturers. Nevertheless, there are significant price pressures presently and active discussions with some of the brands. Those with reseller business partners, for example, can bring CTO items into the UK in advance, image, and then hold for calling off as required. Crucially, plan for volatility and unpredictability and adapt to where the supply is. Try to be as flexible as feasibly possible. I hope everyone has enjoyed the presentation. One final request. The Collaborative National ICT Group, which holds a virtual meeting around every 4 weeks, is currently looking for technical representation from both LUPC and SUPC members. If you are interested, please contact either myself if I'm an LUPC or Mark Lewis if an SUPC member. Thanks everyone. I'll be around for the rest of the afternoon. If you have a question, please pop it into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen.